One morning in January last year, a piece of software appeared on the internet for free. Within days, it had wiped close to $600 billion in value of the most valuable company on earth. That was the largest single-day loss in the history of the stock market, and it was triggered by something nobody had to pay for. The company was NVIDIA, and the software was an AI model released by a Chinese lab with its weights open for anyone in the world to download. And the world doing all the damage, the world was free and open source. Of course, the software was DeepSeek. That word is the most expensive word in technology, free. I want to spend the next 20 minutes on what it hides. Now, I have been working with open source software for more than 30 years. That is long enough to watch the same story play out over and over in different decades with different logos painted on it. The story goes like this. Someone builds something useful and gives it away. Other people improve it for free on their own time because the work matters to them. The thing becomes valuable and then it becomes essential. And at exactly that point, a company arrives, wraps the free thing inside something it can charge for, and captures the value that a community created. Sometimes the people who built it benefit. Often they don't. Let me make that concrete. In the late 1990s, I worked at a New Zealand internet service provider, actually the first commercial one, called Icons. We ran the whole thing on Linux, on hardware that would embarrass a modern phone. On the 19th of February 1998, Auckland lost power, that's the biggest city in New Zealand, and the entire country lost the internet. Every other provider stayed down. A colleague drove to Hamberger, borrowed a generator, and we cabled the server room ourselves. We were the only provider in the country online that afternoon. That is not a story about heroics. It is a story about what happens when you can see inside the systems you run. When you understand every layer, you can fix every layer. Hold on to that idea. We're coming back to it. The thing I remembered the most from those years is not the technology, it is the people. They understood what they ran, not from a vendor course, but from reading the source and fixing it themselves. That's how I learned it. They treated building good infrastructure as a kind of public service, whether or not anyone with a budget had asked them to. That culture did not survive the enterprise wave intact. And the part of that was lost is part of what you got enclosed, as in made unopen. Richard Stallman called software free as in freedom. The movement that followed softened it to free as in beer, which only means no cost. Both of those are true, but neither one describes the part I kept watching happen. The labor that built the commons, the weekends and the late nights, and the expertise no single company could have funded was repeatedly taken by people who had never contributed a line to it. Not stolen in any way a court would recognize. Taken all the same. Free as in theft. I'm not a bystander to this. I later sold enterprise Linux for a large vendor across Australia and New Zealand. I was inside the machine, doing the extracting, and I was good at it. The community wrote the kernel. The vendors took it to the market and kept the margin. The value was real. So was the taking. Keep that pattern in your head because you're about to watch it happen again faster than it ever has. Before AI, there was the cloud. And the cloud is the clearest example of this move in the whole history of software. Think about the databases that quietly run the modern internet. There is a handful of them, all built by communities, all given away under open licenses. Then the cloud providers arrived. The biggest of them took those community databases, wrapped them in a billing system, and rented them out by the hour. It did not write the software, it did not join the communities that did, it needed only the license, and the license allowed it. Here is the quiet part. When you used one of those services, you never saw the open source underneath. You saw the console and an invoice. The community that built and maintained the thing became invisible, and an invisible community attracts fewer contributors, less money, and less attention. The foundation that everyone stands on is getting thinner year after year, while the people standing on it look the other way, or actually getting older. And invisible labor is also unguarded labor. That is the part that should worry you. A few years ago, a serious flaw turned up in a small piece of software that quietly secured a large share of the web, maintained by a tiny group of volunteers with almost no funding. More recently, someone spent 2 patient years befriending an exhausted volunteer maintainer, took over his project, and very nearly slipped a hidden backdoor into systems all over the world. We caught that one by luck. When nobody can see the people holding the foundation up, nobody notices when the foundations start to crack. This is not a law of nature. Netflix, in the same period, handed real tools back to the community it borrowed from. So extraction was always a choice, not a necessity. Most of the giants choose extraction. The companies who built those databases, the cloud environments, did eventually fight back. Between 2018 and 2024, one after another, they changed their licenses to stop the bleeding. But look at the timing. The resistance always arrived after the value has already been captured, and it never wins back what was taken. That is the shape of the entire cycle. Build, grow, and close, and then far too late resist. Keep that clock in mind, because the same move is now being made on AI, and the clock is running faster than anyone is ready for. So, this brings me back to that January morning last year. The model that rattled the market mattered for a reason beyond the share price. It was released genuinely open. The weights were public, the method was documented, anyone could download it and run it. By the lab's own account, it had been trained for a few $1 million, a small fraction of what everyone assumed the frontier cost. Analysts argued hard about that figure, and they were right to argue, but the point survived the argument. A small team gave away something the giants were selling, and in doing so, it forced a question the industry had spent 3 years avoiding. What does open actually mean when we're talking about AI? Because open has quietly become the most abused word in this field. Here is the move, and once you see it, you will see it everywhere. A company releases the model weights. It calls the model open source, and it stops there. It does not release the data the model was trained on. It does not release the code you would need to rebuild it. And the license usually tells you what you are allowed to use it for, and sometimes who is allowed to use it at all. Take Meta's Llama, the most downloaded so-called open model in the world. Meta calls it open source. The open source initiative, the body that actually defines that term, says plainly that it is not. Why not? Because the license discriminates. One clause carves out the largest companies. In later versions, another clause shuts out anyone in the European Union. There are limits on the fields you may use it in. A generally open license cannot do any of that. This is not a small print quibble. It is the difference between something you own and something you are renting, on terms the owner can change. In 2024, that's 2 years ago, the Open Source Initiative published a definition of open source AI to draw exactly this line. Open means the data, the code, and the weights, enough that someone else could rebuild the model and check your work. Some companies accepted it and dropped the word open from the models that did not qualify. The biggest did not, and it's still fighting a definition it helped to write. And the data is the part that matters most. The data is where a model's judgment actually comes from. If you cannot see what a model was trained on, you cannot know what it is inside it or whose work was taken to make it. And you cannot prove it is safe to use where the rules are strict. That is not a technicality. Right now, authors and artists are in court daily around the world, arguing that their work was taken without permission and without payment to build these systems. We have heard that argument before in this talk. There's something almost too neat about how this one closes the loop. These models were trained on the open commons itself. Decades of shared code, mailing lists, license tags, the written record of a movement that believed in giving things away. The companies that built the models did not ask the commons for permission, and they have not paid it back. Their cycle has started to feed on the very thing that taught us the word open. So here is the taste you can carry out of this room tonight. When a vendor calls an AI system open, do not argue about the word. Ask what they actually are handing you. The weights, perhaps. The training data, usually not. The right to run it on your own machines, your own way, without asking permission, almost never. It comes down to two questions. Can you look inside it? Can you leave it? If the answer to either is no, what you have is not open. It may still be useful, for sure. Just never let the label hide the leash. And notice the speed. Unix took about a decade to move from open to enclosed. The cloud compressed that to roughly 5 years. This one has taken months. The gap between a thing being open and a thing being enclosed is now so short that if you wait to see how it plays out, you will already have lost the choice. So, there's a sharper edge to this for a country like ours. New Zealand grows most of its own food and makes most of its own power. We're lucky like that. It manufactures none of its own chips, and it trains none of its own frontier models. Our ability to govern this technology rests entirely on whether it stays open enough for a small country to see inside it. In Te Ao Maori, Kaitiakitanga is the duty to guard something for the generations who come after. You cannot be a guardian of something you cannot see inside. An open system keeps inspection possible. A closed one removes it. This is a design principle and not a slogan. So, Monday morning. What do you actually do on Monday morning? What can you do on Monday morning? First, in the meeting where the decisions get made, ask the two questions before you sign anything. Can we look inside it? Can we leave it? If the honest answer to either is no, you are not adopting a tool. You are entering a dependency, and you should know that is what is going on. Second, cost the exit, not just the entry. Every story I have told you tonight is the same story underneath. A technology that was cheap or free to adopt turned out to be expensive to leave. The true price of any system includes the price of getting out of it again. If that price is too high to pay, then what you bought was never really a tool at all, but it was a dependency. Third, build so that you can leave. Build your architecture able to swap one provider for another. Put a layer of your own between your organization and any single vendor. Test your work against more than one model. That is the modern version of the fork. And it is the thing that keeps your options open when the vendor changes the terms, which the whole history of this field says the vendor eventually will. When the price doubles or the model you depend on is quietly switched off, you want a week of migration in front of you, not a year. Fourth, contribute, and organize before the enclosure arrives rather than after it. The structures that actually protected communities in this story were built early by people who had watched the last cycle and moved before the next one closed. Resistance after the fact recovers less than it lost, every single time. I started with a word, free. The thing about that January morning is that the model really was free to download and the people who built it really did give it away. The only barrier to using it was skill and time, not permission. That is what open is supposed to mean. And it is far rarer than the marketing suggests. The question in front of every one of us is not whether AI is real. It is real. The question is who will own it and whether you will see the enclosure coming before it encloses you. It cannot stand here and promise, I cannot stand here and promise you the cycle can be broken. 30 years in, I do not know that it can. What I do know this, you cannot break a pattern you cannot see. Now you can see it. So before you fall in love with the price, read the license. Free is the most expensive word in technology. Make them show you what it costs. Today's stream is dedicated to my friend who died last week, Ross McKenzie, who was the ultimate open source salesperson, the best one in the field. Ross, I love you, brother. I hope you're happy there where you're now. Please continue watching the channel every day. On the Hamberger report, we deliver AI daily for tech leaders.